Hello, listeners. My name is Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and I'm the host of the podcast, The Truth That Heals. I am a survivor of years of cult abuse and have made a platform to help me on my healing journey. And it's a platform where we can listen to other survivors, experts, share their stories, share their experiences, and share the possibility of healing. I think it is time for victims to be heard and that all victims have the right to want healing and to seek justice. You can find my podcast on all major podcast platforms, Twitter, and on YouTube. That is the Truth That Heals podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast, and for this mini-series, I am sitting down with two inspiring women who have escaped the clutches of the notorious cult, the Children of God. As former members of this movement, our guests share their harrowing experiences, detailing the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse experienced within this group, as well as the indoctrination tactics used by the cult's leaders. The two voices today are not just survivors, but are strong advocates for cult education and awareness. Our guests, Whisper and Jemima, are now the hosts of their own podcast, the Butterflies and Bravery podcast, where they themselves provide a platform for other survivors to share their stories and discuss the continuing relevance of cults in our society today. Throughout this engaging, sensitive, and thought-provoking conversation, we explore the challenges of leaving a cult, the importance of support and community in recovery, and the power of speaking out against abuse and manipulation. If you're interested in learning more about first-person accounts of those who grew up in the Children of God, you can visit the Butterflies and Bravery podcast. Or follow the link in the episode description for their website. This series is powerful and inspiring, but it does come with trigger warnings. We will be discussing sensitive events, so please be careful and listen with discretion. These two inspiring women are working to create a safer and more informed world. Here is Whisper and Jemima. So hello, Whisper and Jemima, hosts of the Butterflies and Bravery podcast. Thank you both so much for being here today to tell the listeners about your experiences and the work that you do. Would you like to start by introducing yourselves? Whisper.
Sure. Hi, my name's Whisper, and I am currently in California, around San Diego. And yeah, we've been doing the Butterflies and Bravery podcast for about a year and a half now. I have grown children. I have 4 grown children that all no longer live with me. So I just have my little puppy, the only one that's left here with me. Yeah, that's
And
a little
what's
bit.
the weather like in San Diego right now?
Oh, this is like this is one of the best times of the year for me because it's still cool and crisp in the evenings, and then the sun comes out in the afternoons, and it's like like fall weather almost, like early fall weather.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely. Wow. It's just wet and miserable here, just perpetually. Just England is just wet and rainy. And hi, Jemima. Thank you for being here.
Hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jemima and I am 50 years old. I was born in the Children of God cult and I was born in Seattle, but I never lived there. I did a lot of traveling. My whole life was traveling basically until I left the cult, and even then for a while. I have one child and I am married, and my daughter just came back to live with us. She was living over in Oregon, and she just came back in the end of October. Um, and so it's really nice to have her back around.
Lovely. So the Children of God, was it a commune that you were born in Seattle?
Yes, actually, it was called the Widows Colony
Hmm.
because that's where they put all the single mothers. In the beginning of the cult, it was quite different from what it grew into. It's kind of like taking those. I don't know if you have them over there, but they're here. They you buy this little thing. It looks like a pill, and then you put it in water, and it grows into this big animal. It's kind of like that. Like I think when they originally joined the cult, they were just taking a little red pill, or a little blue pill. And what it grew into was something completely different and not what it started out as. But so yeah, she actually went from the widows colony in Seattle to a widows colony in Hawaii. Where
Right.
they actually lived. She was telling me they lived separately. When the cult first started, the women and the men lived separately.
Hmm.
They
Yeah.
weren't even allowed to hold hands or do anything unless they were married.
So when you say they, I am assuming that you're talking about your parents.
Yes.
So they were first generation members of the Children of God. Did they
Yes.
join when the group was in sort of the California area, or did they pick up with the group as it was starting to expand throughout the country and then the world?
Well, my mom joined in Idaho, but they had come straight from California. And the only reason they came here is because the person that was in California just getting converted in the late 60s, early 70s had come from Idaho and was like, oh, I got great musicians back home. Well, we can go convert them and they can come and be musicians for the cult. But my dad was like, no. My mom was like, oh, yeah, great idea. I'm pregnant and married, but bye. Whisper, did your mom join in California?
No, she actually joined upstate New York,
Oh,
where she's originally from. Yeah, her and my biological dad joined then, and
So, Whisper, you're also a former member of the Children of God.
yes, I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. I also was born in the Children of God, and Jemima and I have been best friends since we were 14, so I'm a year younger than her. So
My
it's been a
goodness. So
while.
you had each other in the actual the communes themselves. You had each other to look out for one another.
sometimes.
Sometimes.
The love
They
was there.
the love forever, yes.
The connections were cut constantly
Yeah.
because
Hmm.
we weren't supposed to have any sort of personal ties. One of the big children of God's things was no like personal love. It's all just a group love kind of a thing.
I'm recalling some moments from Faith Jones's Sex Cult Nun where she's
Hmm.
separated from childhood friends and then she reunites with those individuals later on in the book. So I'm wondering if later in the interview there may be some instances where the same sorts of themes come through. Which I'm sure they will in various ways, maybe not that specific. So Whisper, your parents, they were first generation as well?
Yes.
And Jemima, you mentioned that you only have one child. So what age were you when you managed to escape from the group?
I was 27. I was 27 years old when I got my driver's license, when I got my first job, when I got an apartment and, you know, became a sort of introduced into the world. I was actually still living with the cult or in the cult because it kind of broke into smaller things later on. Like the communes were early and then it changed a lot and became smaller. So you only had to have 4 adults. So we had myself and my friend and then another couple, and that was it. And we were living near Seattle in an apartment. But then I got excommunicated for smoking pot. Yeah. So I didn't really choose to leave. I got booted, but that was how my eyes were opened to what was going
It's
on, sort of.
interesting to think about the time period that your parents would have been introduced to the group because marijuana was very much a part of American society at that time. So I imagine that there were a lot of individuals who had partaken in the plant themselves and were then responsible for telling you you couldn't stay because you did the same.
Yeah,
Do
exactly.
either of you have um any idea or reference to what your parents' experiences were like? Because I read Mary Mahoney's Abnormal Normal, which was a really good way of understanding how the children of God really changed, as you said, from something that was one thing and now something that is just so, like unrecognizable from the small sort of Bible study groups that started out in California. Have either of you had the opportunity to speak to your parents candidly about what it was like for them then, or do you have any idea from other people who can speak to you about what life was like for your parents? Whisper, you're giving me a nod.
Yeah, we would hear all kinds of different stories. Both Jemima and I were separated from our parents when we were around 12, but later on, um, they they always wanted to make it a point of how bad the outside world was, the system, as they called it. My mom joined right in the height of the hippie, revolution back in like Vietnam War, that type of thing. So that's what the young kids were doing. Everyone was like dropping out, and so when Berg, the leader, came along with this revolution for Jesus, is essentially what he called it. It was so compelling, because she was like, I didn't want to have anything to do with my parents' generation, so I wanted to go serve, you know, be Christian and is super radicalized. It was definitely portrayed as a radicalized idea, but it was also, as Jemima was saying, straight out of the evangelical sort of mindset of, yeah, no touching before marriage, the thing. So, but yeah, my mom came. I know my mom came from a broken home. Um, some, not a happy home life. Um, my biological dad, I don't know almost anything about him, but my stepdad that I grew up with, that I had since I was a, a 1 year old, he actually came out of a very happy home. Very close family, tight knit, very, middle class, well off. And I think it was just one of those, similar to Jemima's mom, like they were passing through, like they were hitting up the universities and stuff like that, because that's where the young people were that wanted to leave, to drop out. And so he joined. I don't know what called him, but it wasn't as much of an escape as it was for my mom, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Those themes of disenchantment and searching around the 60s and 70s specifically, to have that added layer of family trauma. I imagine a place like the Children of God that promises you a family and
Mm-hmm.
community, and the binding of having a common goal of serving Jesus or David Berg, whichever way people would look at it. I can imagine that must have been very attractive and still would be to individuals who are experiencing or have experienced the same sorts of things. Jemima,
Yeah.
would you say that there's anything that you can add to that around how your parents became involved and what life was like for them during the time they found the Children of God?
I think for my parents, it was more of a they had been doing too many drugs. Because both of my parents came from pretty good homes. I mean, my dad was an orphan and he was adopted at birth, and their baby had died of some sort of terrible disease when he was 2 years old. So they adopted my dad and just spoiled him rotten. I mean, he always had everything he wanted, all the love and care you could possibly get. were absolutely wonderful people. Like the whole town loved them. They were just like the most wonderful people you could imagine. And then my grandparents were on my mother's side were very much the same. My grandpa was a plumber, my grandma was a teacher. I mean, my mom has been like writing about her life, and I'm like, you had a good life. Like, what the hell were you thinking? I mean, but that's why I think it had a lot to do with the drug use that had been going on, because like my dad was really into the drugs, and I think my mom just kind of went along with it, and then she got bored of it. And that's when she was like, okay. And she did write that she always felt like there was something more, that universal feeling of longing for belonging type of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And she just didn't want to do the typical hippie mentality. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to do what their parents did. They didn't want to live in a neat little box. They wanted to be happy and free and love. But what she did is pump out 8 kids when in actuality, she should have been thinking about herself. And
Mm-hmm.
like, she was not ready to be a parent in any
Okay.
way,
Yeah.
shape, or form.
Agree.
I was going to ask how many siblings you both had, and also that's why I made a point that it was interesting, Jemima, that you have the one child, because a big part of the Children of God is or the Family International, sorry, as it's known today, a big part of the message of the Children of God was to expand the family, and by doing that,
Mm-hmm.
it was encouraged to have more and more children. Jemima, do you feel like that's what was put onto your mum, that expectation, and that's why she had a number of children?
Yes, there was no birth control, and like you said, it was a plan to expand. I think in David Berg's mind, he was just trying to build a little robot army of children, and I think
Well,
that's
yeah.
the best way that he could think to do it. So that's why they were like, procreate, have tons of babies. My mom told me that she did not accept the fact that she was a mother until she had 3 children. So that means I was 7 years old before she even accepted the fact that she was a mother. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Whisper,
Well, I mean,
are you one of many children?
I'm pale compared to her. She's got like 20.
yeah, I have a total of 18 siblings. Most of them are from my mother and stepfather's side, and then some of them are from my biological father's and his wife's side. So I have a total of 18. I was for most of my life the oldest of 11. And yeah, it wasn't even ever like that there was a choice. Oh, like we should procreate. I mean, they told us all the time, like, yes, we're making God's new army. You are the purest of the pure. You'll never have touched the system, which is what they call the outside world. But in reality, there was simply no choice. It's like if you got pregnant, you had that kid. And, so there was, well, this family always stood out in my mind because I was like always scared for the one, but she like on at clockwork would have a baby every single year, like clockwork. And like she, as soon as her babies were born, she was practically too sick already to care for them, and so we would get them. This was when we were teenagers. You probably know who I'm talking about, Jemima. I
Yeah.
think she ended up like having like close to 20 children.
Oh
That's what I
gosh.
thought, 18 or 19. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all she could do is pretty much lay in bed.
Yeah, because it just ate her away. But that was what God gave you, so that's what you were going to accept. And so yeah, that it was very similar in the same vein of uh for me, I got together with my partner back then. He I was 20, he was 17. Um And we had 4 kids within 6 years. So
There's so much more to the message of expanding the family, isn't there? As you've just said, Whisper, that goes with the pressure to have children, because women, and I think also, all genders within the children of God, to some extent, women really have no sovereignty over themselves, their body. There's no birth control, but also there's the pressure and expectation to continuously be sharing yourself, as in having sex
mhm,
with other members of the children of God. So really it's creating this inescapable cycle where
mhm,
women are always going to find themselves in a situation of either having sexual intercourse or being pregnant or nursing children. And so I can't imagine being stuck in that poor woman, just stuck in that eternal cycle. And a woman who is bedbound is in no position to be encouraging sexual intercourse. So you think then about the conditions of her lack of consent around being in bed and being approached by people and saying, yes, okay, let's have sex so I can be pregnant again. There's just so much more than just encouraging people to have children. And it's I mean, Whisper, you have so many siblings. Are you in touch with any of them? Did you ever manage to have any type of sibling relationship?
yeah, I'm to a certain extent. I whatever we weren't allowed was usually what we wanted. Like I always wanted to be closer to my siblings. I didn't know any of the siblings on my biological father's side until uh, a few years into coming to the United States. I started to get to know them, and yeah, I've gotten to know them. They're really lovely. A lot of really lovely people, and but there was periods of time where like I went, like 7, 8 years without seeing my family, and the next time I went to go visit, there was 3 more children, that I'd never met. So
It's kind of horrifying and shocking, but the preferred woman was a pregnant woman because you could have full sex with her without having to worry about getting her pregnant. So the preferred sex partners, I know it's horrifying, but it's true. The preferred sex partners were always the married women. Those are the ones that everybody would be lining up for because they knew it wasn't going to result in a child and they could do whatever they wanted.
mhm. but
Yeah, I'm
and
sorry.
but then because of that open sexual rotation through all the adults in the communes, especially in some of the closer closed communities, like in our case in Thailand. I mean, there were people having children from other, like women were having children from other fathers, from other men, not that they
Right.
were not together with. And so had it gone on to any extent of the way that it was, I mean, you would have no idea if you were going to be getting with your half brother or sister, because it was a free for all. So
And that's by design, isn't it? Almost the breakdown of relationship, the separation of children from their parents, so that the allegiance is always to God, or Berg. It's always, it's your focus is always on the scripture and the teachings and the Bible study, and service to God through sex with other people in the community. It's not about, where are my children? Are they okay? Are they fed? Are they clothed? Are they safe from predators and abusers who were infiltrating the system, because it was led by somebody who was also a child abuser. So it's a lot more, isn't it, than just than just having children. There's all these extra added layers which are covered up through language and terminology to be for other reasons. And I suppose by the time you were both born, your parents had really lost sight of that through their intense kind of separation from the outside world. Jemima, you mentioned that you were one of 8 children. Do you have a relationship with any of your siblings?
Barely. Almost not at all. I've just started talking to one of my brothers, but other than that, it's just no, they don't even tell me happy birthday to be honest, or Merry Christmas or anything. Like, no. The only time that any of us got together is when my niece died, and that was it. Yeah, there's not that they kind of I think part of their whole design was to like my I was talking to my brother about this the other day. He said, sometimes I want to call my sisters and brothers, but then I'm scared because like it brings this feeling of dread and fear when you want to reach out to them because it was always cut off so quickly, any kind of connection. And it almost, like he said, every time I talk to one of my brothers and sisters, it brings back my childhood trauma because all of a sudden you're a kid again and you're hearing your mom's voice again and you're hearing your big sister's voice again. And if you haven't worked through that trauma, it's really hard. So yeah, my family's completely torn apart.
You mentioned that your parents left you both at 12, but you found each other at 14. So I wondered, Jemima, if you could just talk the listeners through what your life looked like, ages from as young as you can remember up to the age of 12, where your parents left you.
Well, after going to Hawaii when I was 6 weeks old, my mom found a new mate there, is what they called them, because husband was too lovey-dovey, and had a few more kids. He ended up wanting to leave the cult, so we went back to the United States, and my mom hooked up with another guy in the cult who was traveling to Michigan. So they basically in 1976, I think, said to everybody, go back to your homes. We're gonna restructure everything. Basically, the children of God is dead, and we're gonna restart. We'll tell you what to do. Just go wait for instructions. So my mom went back to where she was born. The house that she lived in as a child, my grandparents still owned and had been renting out, but it was vacant. So we moved into the house that my mom grew up in. And that probably would have been a pretty okay time for me, except for that my mother was supporting us by FFing, flirty fishing, which is prostitution, bottom line, but for Jesus, so it's okay. But that was our only method of support, except for they were selling like Sam's Club type of stuff, Amway, powdered eggs, because the end of the world, yada, yada. So that actually ended up being one of the worst times of my life because of the stepdad that she got involved in was extremely abusive to all of his children. He abused us in every manner possible. And I actually got taken away by the court from my home and family for child abuse when I was 8. I spent my 8th birthday at my grandparents' house, but after 3 months, they gave me back. I actually cried and I said, I don't want to go back. And they just gave me back. So that was kind of I think a little bit of a wake-up call for my mom. But did she leave the guy? Nope, she did not. She stayed with him for another like 2-3 years. Then we traveled to Arizona. She thought we were going to go be missionaries. We didn't have enough money. And she met another guy through FFing who is still my stepdad. So I had 5 dads before I turned 12. My biological father, the one who fathered my next 2 siblings, the one who fathered the sibling after that, one abusive stepfather, then the next stepfather that she kind of met through FFing. And then he felt sorry for her because she had 6 kids and we were all just poor and had nothing. So he's like, I want to marry you and take care of your kids. So I guess she got like special permission from the cult because he was never in the cult. So for a while we had fairly normal life. I mean, I went to school for 1 or 2 years. We lived in a little townhouse. I watched cartoons. Everything was what I would call a normal life. When I was 12 years old, this is where it gets fun. Uh, there was a camp in Mexico called the YAFM, the Youth Area Fellowship Meeting. This was a predecessor to all the teen camps. And it was for only the oldest kids went. There was not as many. It was like 30 or 40 of us. And so they kind of had a like trial run for what the teen camps were going to be. And then ended up being invited to stay in Mexico and do like performing. So we just sang and went all over the country. And then this is where I was 12 years old and being introduced to the sharing schedule and regular sex with adult men and orgies and threesomes and all sorts of things. And then at 14, I went to Japan, then to the Philippines, then to Thailand, and that's where I met Whisper. It's a long story. That's really, 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 really condensed.
The flirty fishing that your mum was involved with at that time, they did stop that during, from my understanding, the AIDS epidemic. They really cut back
Yes.
on flirty fishing, and then it seems almost like sex within the group really ramped up at that point, because then people were encouraged to take care of their sexual needs internally.
Correct.
So I'm just gonna, if you two keep nodding, I'm just gonna keep going. So please correct me if I do get anything wrong. So flirty fishing, from reading Mary Mahoney's book, I was able to understand that if you found men that were particularly forthcoming with money or jewelry or things that you could give back to the children of God, because you weren't typically really allowed to keep anything that you were gifted from flirty fishing. Do you think that might be the reason why your mum was able to stay with your stepdad?
Oh yes, absolutely. Because he brought in money for the group. She had to tithe. She still had to tithe 15%. She would secretly keep tithing, and then he would get super mad at her, and it was a constant thing. But so technically, we were still in the group, but we weren't really living like we were in the group. That was very, very short lived, though. But
Yeah.
yes, that's exactly the reason.
Yeah, there were a few exceptions made like that, and that's when they went from being called fish to being called kings.
Yep.
And so there was a handful of women that had made these connections with men that were essentially like in a relationship, and because they were bringing so much money into the cult, of course, exceptions were made.
Do
Yeah.
either of you remember when flirty fishing was stopped within the group, or is that something that happened before you were old enough to remember?
Oh no, we remember.
No, yeah, yeah, very clearly.
Whisper, what was your life like, ages 1 to 12, in comparison to Jemima's experiences?
Um, we left the United States when I was not even 2, and my parents traveled to Europe, and so they were in Italy and France, places like that. I have no memory, and from there they went to Scandinavia, which is Sweden, Denmark, Norway. I do have some memories there because that's when I was getting to be about 5, 4 or 5. And then that's when the R&R happened, which is what does it stand for again? Something with the reorganization and restructuring, or something like
Nationalization.
nationalization. That's right.
Reorganization, nationalization, revolution. That's
There you
R&R.
go.
Was this after Berg's death that this happened? This
No,
big.
no. This is kind of early on in the
76.
Yeah, 76, 77. So we went back to the United States for a short while. Then when I was 8, we moved to Mexico. And at the time, one of the big pushes that the cult wanted to get going was what they called fellowships, which is, getting together with different homes and different communes and joining together and, having fellowship. So the height of that was happening where we lived in Mexico. Everybody was in trailers. Like the big idea was everybody got trailers and went from the United States to Mexico. I think that's the caravanning that happened there. And so we would stay in these trailer parks that, there was several, dozens of families actually, to be honest. And that's the time when my abuse started quite badly. So I was about 8 when that happened. And yes, there was just like a constant, because everybody was in trailers, right? So there was like this constant like musical chairs. I don't know what everybody else did. I know we went singing on the weekends. I remember going and singing and performing on the weekends, but during the week I don't know what everybody else did except sleep with each other. At least that's what it felt like for me from as a child's eyes. From there, once we left Mexico, we went to Malaysia, and we're in Malaysia for about a year and a half, and that's when the height of FFing really started. That I became very aware of it about 9 and 10. We started getting told, like, like you're going to grow up and, like when you get old enough, you're going to be doing this too, type of a thing. And there was quite a few, there was a few different times. There was some of the bigger, they weren't kings per se, but they were definitely like kind of bigger fish. They bigger donators. And so they would often go to the different homes and just, they would date whatever women they wanted to. And during that period of time, there was a few of them that were quite keen on me. And so I would be sent out with them to go wherever and be abused. But but I brought in gold because they would give me jewelry and then I would pass the jewelry on to my parents. So
this isn't people taking advantage of the musical chairs upheaval and finding you in a vulnerable place where no other adults are present. This was people knew that this was happening and they were taking you with them so that this could happen.
I mean, I was a child. I was looking at it through the child's eyes. What was going on in Mexico at first? Yes, it was that. It was being vulnerable. But when we were in Malaysia, there was like, it's hard to like really emphasize enough just how big flirty fishing was. It was like letter after letter, like what do you call them, missives, the Mo letters, like letter after letter after letter after letter. Like if you were not doing this, you were not in God's will. You were, you were wrong. You were. So it was such a like everybody was just like going for that, like as hard and as fast as they could. So there was like an element of, we got to let these people do whatever they want because they're bringing in money and they're giving us protection. And a couple of the people that would come and would want to take me out they were high up in the government or in places of power, and they needed that protection at the time. So those were those were just my worst years there. Those were really bad years. And then we moved to Thailand. I turned 12 in Thailand, and for a little while I stayed in the homes with my mom, but then they had this really, like, the rules were constantly changing, like constantly, like you could never keep up with what the rule was. And so when we went to Thailand, there was this rule that you couldn't have more than 25 people in the home at the time, because they were afraid of, like, the authorities, seeing us and all these white people living in a home all together. So when my mom was pregnant with my sister at the time, she went to the hospital to have her, and they couldn't bring her back until they sent me away, because she would have been the 26th person.
So one person out, one person in situation. It just happened to be that they needed you to go so that your mum could come home. Oh my goodness.
Well, I was, I suppose, the expendable one at the time. So yeah, so I bounced around there from home to home. Turned 12 at that time, so there was a lot of what Jemima was talking about too. There was sharing, the being on the sharing schedules, the wheel, and finally around 14 was when they started the school vision. I went to the teen camp. I think I was 13 when we went to the teen camp. Because you went when you were 12, right, Jemima? 12-ish?
I went to the YAFM when I was 12, and then I went to the teen training camp. I got
The Mexican
there.
TTC.
The Mexican TTC, I arrived on the day of my 14th birthday.
Okay,
That's the only reason I remember it, because I remember it being the day of my 14th birthday that I arrived there, and it started the day after my 14th birthday. So I was 12 and then 14.
Yeah. So that's around the time that they had the Thailand, the Thai, or the Southeast Asia, when I was 13. And so by the end of our 14th year, we had met each other.
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series on the Children of God, with Whisper and Jemima, co-hosts of the Butterflies and Bravery podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the Butterflies and Bravery podcast, you can follow the links in the episode description, and to get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com, or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.